So it's my very pleasant task as Chair of the CONUL Board to welcome you all here to the 2023 CONUL Conference here in sunny Cork. It's always such a pleasure to be in the room with so many people, so interested and lively, a wonderful library community here. Since we met last year in May in Limerick for the last CONUL Conference, it's been a really busy year for libraries. We've managed and delivered and adapted our library services over that last year. We saw out COVID, the energy crisis, the challenges of ebook SOS, emerging technologies such as AI, and increasingly politicized agendas across the world. It's never been more important. Libraries have never been more important, and everybody in this room has never been more valuable. A high point of the year since we last met was hosting the hugely successful IFLA WLIC 2022 that brought the global library community here to Ireland, a really special event. Over that period as well, the CONUL board reviewed and extended the CONUL strategy out from 2022 out to 2024. And the SIG, the Strategy Implementation Group, and all the CONUL groups are continuing to work to deliver the strategy and also addressing increasingly urgent issues such as EDI, diversity, and sustainability, which is our conference theme this year. I really want to acknowledge and thank all the CONUL groups and the chairs for all their hard work over the period of the strategy, but particularly over the last year, which has been busy and challenging. And especially to thank the conference committee. We wouldn't be here without them, and Fiona. So it's an honour now to introduce our first keynote speaker. Rebekkah Smith Aldrich is the Executive Director of the Mid-Hudson Library System in New York. She's the co-founder and board president of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, and she's the principal author of the award-winning Sustainable Library Certification Programme. For over 20 years, Rebekkah has worked with public libraries across the globe to ensure library services are relevant and responsive so that our communities thrive. So I'm really excited to hear her talk. She's going to speak to us about our Grandest challenge.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for getting up and coming in here. I froze at like 11:10. I'm like, I think they're going to stay in the exhibit hall. So I was glad to see you all come into the room. I'm really pleased to be here today and very grateful to Dr. Collins, the board, and the conference committee for inviting me. I've been in this profession for 25 years, published several times, and nothing has made my mother more proud than being invited to speak in Ireland. So thank you. So mission accomplished. I could take off right now. I'm fine. You could enjoy your morning, but I thought maybe we could talk today a bit about sustainability and the work we've been doing a bit in the US on the topic. For about the past decade, I've been working with my colleagues to try to create some more urgency behind the topic of climate change and sustainability in libraries. So today what I was hopeful we could do is talk a little bit about that work and maybe how it might dovetail with what I see you're doing here, which is pretty cool. Sarah, shout out to Sarah Timmons, that poster, love it. So when we talk about sustainability today, what I want to do is introduce some of the broader concepts and how we're starting to talk about it in a way that's gotten far more traction in the US than we've seen in a very long time, as well as give you some examples from the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, which is a volunteer-led initiative with folks just like yourself. My colleagues and I got together a few years ago and we're kind of like, this is ridiculous. Like, we're not working fast enough or hard enough on this topic. Can we make a difference? And stop waiting for someone else to do it. Because sometimes I think being an adult, every once in a while, you realize, oh, that's me, I'm supposed to do that. So we decided to step up and try some new things. So we're going to share today with you some of the things we've been doing and the libraries that have joined us. We have over 100 libraries in our program, representing both public, academic, and school librarians. So it's kind of fun to be here. Not only do you have a fantastic topic for your conference, but the Jane Austen reference. I mean, come on. It's like a triple threat. So I'm going to start really, really broad, and then we're going to narrow down to get to some very practical things, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. So I thank you for being here and hope you'll at least stay awake for, 75% of it. So I said I was going to start broad, not much broader than we can get than talking about planet Earth. And of course, we all had an acute lesson in being global citizens during COVID-19. And part of what's really gotten lost, I think, in the conversation and the intensity of the disruption that COVID-19 caused was really what was going on with climate change and some of the peaks and valleys that we saw during the same period of time. So I'd like to start with this picture just to kind of center ourselves and thinking about what we're really talking about here, which is not political boundaries. It's not our preferences for certain things in life. We're talking about the very earth and the ground that we stand on and how we actually survive it based on the damage that we've done to it over the past few generations. So I have a favorite quote by Alvin Toffler. He's the author of Future Shock. He wrote that in the 1970s, but still many relevant points in it today. And I have this in my office, and my staff roll their eyes every time I bring it up. But you really do have to think about the small things to make sure they're all going in the right direction, because the big things are so big. And if we don't acknowledge the big things, when we do the small things, we just aren't organized enough to make a difference. So as we think about all the small things we did just to get here today in this room together this morning, you heard from the conference chair and your board chair here all the careful decisions they made about handouts, the water bottle, how you got here, are you healthy? How are things going for you today? What are you wearing? All of these little choices that you made, right? You made conscious decisions based on your preferences, your ethics, how you decide to live your life. That has to be scaled up at a grand scale and moving at a faster pace in order for us to survive what is coming in the face of climate change. So again, keeping our eye on the small things is a big part of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. So during 2020, as we saw, COVID really dominated all of our thinking. But buried in the headlines throughout 2020, the climate scientists were out there trying very hard to get our attention, noting we were breaking record after record after record when it came to record-setting heat, severe storms, droughts, flooding. It was just getting worse and worse and worse. And probably one of the scariest things I heard after I understood what the pandemic was a climate change headline, which noted that even if we did everything right when it came to climate change, and we turned it around, and we reduced global warming at the pace the climate scientists are asking us to, we will still have at least 30 more years of increasingly bad weather, severe storms, severe heat waves. So our generation, we are in charge of figuring this out and how to navigate not only keeping global warming down to a manageable level, but also navigating the damage that is already here and already happening. So it's a two-front war, basically, that we are fighting on this topic, which is not a lot of fun when you start to think about the magnitude of all of this. And so part of the work we're trying to do in the Sustainable Libraries Initiative is not only having the reality check of what is actually going on, and it's not a what-if anymore, it's here, how do we manage this, but also to make sure we don't lose hope in the work as we move forward. Ooh, there goes the remote. So estimates are that not only will climate change be impacting regionalities in a particular way, depending on where you live in the world, but we're also going to see massive migration throughout the world. The estimate currently is 1.2 billion people will be displaced by the impacts of climate change, from flooding to heat waves to areas that no longer have stable sources of food, or there'll be such destabilization of government and society that folks will be fleeing. And we can already see that happening. 2020 also marked the first year that the United States had federally funded climate refugees, moving people out of Louisiana who were being impacted by rising sea levels. And so it was another one of those confronting moments where we understood, like, this is already here. It's no longer this abstract idea, and it was getting closer and closer to home for folks in the United States. We're also taking a look at me pressing this button and nothing happening. There we go. Also in 2020, we saw an unprecedented move by all the medical journals throughout the globe. About 200 medical journals for the very first time all published the same editorial, calling on the medical community to wake up and really think about their role in the face of the fact that climate change will profoundly affect every child alive today. So as we look at our motivations and what makes us do things differently, it requires some level of urgency. So whether you're being impacted by it personally or you really care about the future of people, I think it's, for librarians, it's very easy for us because we got into this profession usually to help people. You can raise your hand if you're here for the amazing pay in the profession. I don't know, maybe some of us. Most of us really got into it to help people. And we really are playing the long game and understanding how information and access and equitable access to information is a life-changing act that will really improve the world for generations to come. So it's a natural fit for us to really think about ourselves and how we will be participating in the world of climate action. So at the American Library Association, which is part of the strategy we had at the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, was to work with the larger associations in our country to really leverage their platform to get the attention of more people in our profession. So I co-chaired a special task force on sustainability. Really, it was their way to get me to shut up about it. They gave me some work to do, which I was happy to do, but that resulted in us adopting sustainability as a core value of our profession, which really was a pivot point for us in getting the attention not only of our colleagues, but also the library schools, because the American Library Association accreditates library schools in the US. And so this resolution we passed to make sustainability a core value also mandates that all library schools now teach sustainability moving forward, which again is us playing the long game of understanding we're not in this for 5 minutes, we're in this for, let's say, several decades at the very least. So last year we published another call to action to our community because we really found that people need to start speaking the same language around sustainability. And this is part of building a tribe around the work, is speaking the same language of the work that needs to be done. And we found there was disparate ideas of what we were doing, how we were talking about it, where to spend our time and energy. So we're really trying to create this coalition of people that are thinking about the same things, using the same language. And so this call to action was issued last year through the American Library Association, really leveraging the work we're seeing done by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has been trying to get everyone's attention for decades, right? To do something, to work harder, to work faster. And really 2021, the United Nations Secretary General issued the Code Red for Humanity. Like, you cannot use more emphatic language to get people's attention. And as we really think about the fact this is the #1 global threat to public health, more so than COVID, which was really hard for people to imagine, but it wakes people up when we use this type of language. So we now call this our grandest challenge in the profession. And we do need this emphasis because in the US right now, we're being very distracted by the efforts of censors to censor access to information and life stories that really matter to building community throughout our country. But we can't get so distracted that we don't forget what's going on in the background here is a slow-moving disaster that's been picking up pace over the past several decades. There we go. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Project Drawdown. It was a best-selling book in the US by 100 climate scientists that got together and identified the 100 top climate solutions. And I like things that are based on data. Anyone else? I got no one with me so far today, so that's cool. But I understand you're in research, is that right? Okay, so the idea that every job has to be a climate job in order to have the scale and really scope of the impact that is necessary in the face of climate action. So as we think about our own spheres of influence, whether they be your personal life or your professional life, we all have to take ownership of moving forward and thinking about my job does have climate responsibilities. The choices that you make in your personal life, we just enumerated them as you got here today, thinking about your professional life, no matter what your position is at the library. You're making decisions, you're making purchasing recommendations, you're having areas of study that you choose to engage in, you're choosing how you help people and why you help people. All of these decisions must be now tinged with the idea that you are a climate worker. We all must embrace the idea that we are climate workers because that is the scale of work that's necessary. So the strengths we bring to the table are needed right now, and we're going to talk more about that. So we adopted sustainability as a core value in 2019 at the American Library Association, and I immediately had library school professions knocking on my door and whispering to me, what does that mean? What do I do with that? So one of the major things we had to do was define sustainability for the profession and really think more about how we use that word. For 20 years, I've served as a public library consultant. I know it means I don't fit in here, but much of my work was helping my libraries win their budget votes. In the US, we have to convince taxpayers to individually vote to tax themselves for library services. So that means every single year we have to make the case and justify our existence and explain what we're going to do if they give us more money. In the New York State libraries, that means a 97% passage rate because we're very effective at making our case and helping taxpayers understand their money goes further when we all work together. But what it really required us to do is to get down to values. What do people value at the end of the day? What is most important to them in their lives? And how do we use messaging and through a framework that will connect with more people so they understand the value of what you do? I'm sure many of you can relate to this story, but I have a very large family, and at the America Thanksgiving in November, I would sit next to my grandfather. We have a huge table, like 30 people at it, and we'd all have to give some update about our lives. And my grandfather, to a fault, every year would be like, libraries, people still use those? And for years, I'd get so annoyed. I'd be very irritated and be huffing and puffing at the end of the table, until one year I was like, wait a minute. I'm confident about the work we do. I know how necessary it is. So I waited like months when I had this realization. I knew it was coming, and Papa said, Rebekkah, you're still employed. I'm like, well, let me tell you something. You are late to the game. Let me tell you what's going on. And I use this face. I call it my fake phony smile. Is it working? Right? My eyebrows are up. I'm so confident. This is fantastic. Guess what we're doing in libraries? We just had a 200% increase in this, and this just happened, and we just changed this child's life. And I just fixed this problem for 17,000 people. And he's like, oh, okay. And Karen, how's things going down at that end of the table? He just moved right on, right? So as we think about the language we use, the attitude we have when we talk about what we do, that is half the battle sometimes in how we talk about the work that needs to get done. So in sustainability language, we had to really start to have just not good intentions in the work, but actual impact in what we're doing. So as you explore the worlds of equity, diversity, and inclusion work in libraries, you'll hear this phrase over and over again, right? Impact over intention. We have very, very good intentions in our profession, but often we're not working in a collaborative enough way to have the impacts that we hope to have in that work. And so this concept of collective impact, to get out of these silos where we have very good intentions and we're working very hard, often by ourselves or in small teams, and start really drawing together to have measurable impacts in the areas that we understand are most important to those that we serve on your campus, in society at large. So collective impact requires, again, I'm going to say it for the fourth time, a common vocabulary. So we adopted the triple bottom line definition of sustainability because we found what happened in our association is every time we talked about sustainability, we were the hippies, the green folks over there. Oh yes, we celebrate Earth Day, and people just moved right along. And so we had to start finding ways that were easier to talk about the systemic nature of climate change and how everything's connected. And how do you talk about something that's all connected together without getting completely overwhelmed? So we had to create a framework of how we think about things. And the triple bottom line is not something we created ourselves. It came from an economist, John Elkington, who wrote a book called Cannibals with Forks. And he introduced this idea to the business community of really in a very Machiavellian way, saying you can't just think about the bottom line. It can't just be about the money. You have to understand the resources you're using, both natural and human, and balance those things to have a thriving business in the future. This does translate well for libraries as we start to think about the scale and scope of what we do, from minor purchases that we may make to buildings we may renovate or build, to really conceptually how we do our work and where we choose to put our emphasis in terms of defending things like open access. Why do we do that, right? That's actually tied to climate change, believe it or not. So when we think about this, it's a framework through which to make better decisions. It will not always lead to perfect decisions, but hopefully better decisions than you made yesterday. So what we're talking about is the balance, and you can see it on some of the posters out in the reception area, right? This balance of three ideas. It's not just environmental stewardship. We also have to think about the economic feasibility of the choices that we're making, as well as the human impact of the choices that we're making. So we use the example all the time of, in the public library world, we have summer reading programs, and we have these little things called summer reading program incentives, and children's librarians buy these little toys to incentivize kids to read more during the summer. And invariably, it really boils down to how much did that thing cost and how much budget does the children's librarian have to purchase those things. And meanwhile, they compromise the environmental values and the societal values they have by purchasing items that really have no, it has no useful life, let's admit it. Honestly, my dad would step on it because I dropped it on the floor within 5 days of getting it, and he'd throw it in the garbage. And it's probably still sitting in a landfill 35 years later because it won't break down, it's not biodegradable. So as we think about the items that we buy, just that one little thing, could we have bought something that was biodegradable, made from recycled resources? Are we sure the person who actually made that item was paid a living wage and treated humanely? So as we think about the systemic nature of all of these choices, again, you're starting to get tired. It's the first session of the conference and I'm already exhausted, right? It's a rabbit hole that we go down thinking about this. So what it takes is practice and a shift in our mindsets of how we make those decisions. And so what we've done at the Sustainable Libraries Initiative is to create frameworks and methodologies to get more practice in making decisions like this so it becomes muscle memory. And we can do it almost without thinking conscientiously moving forward. And it's actually working pretty well. So our idea here is to position libraries as sustainability leaders. We're not in the back trailing along. We are at the forefront of some of these discussions, if not sitting at the table to make policy decisions. And that takes work. It takes commitment. It takes strategic goals. It was lovely to hear that your strategic priorities have been renewed for the coming years with this particular emphasis to include EDI and sustainability. It takes that intentionality, right, to put it on the table, to start thinking about it, and to create strategies that will actually make a difference. So we want all library groups to own that idea. And you are doing it here today by coming to a conference whose entire theme is sustainability, which is almost dreamlike for me here today. The thing is, it has to be top down, but it also has to be grassroots coming up. So as you think about where you sit in your institutions, you may be in positions of authority or you may not be. You may be influential, though, in ways that you don't quite realize. So thinking about how do you build the recognition of being sustainability leaders by finding like-minded partners, often students and faculty or wider groups in your communities who also believe this work is very necessary. And how do you really make it local? I think this is part of the problem we've seen over time is that we have to settle it in local, your local community, your campus, what is most important there, and how does it tie to the more strategic goals we see globally as they relate to climate action. So in our world, we've tried to break down the equation because as we can see, and I was speaking last night at dinner, that the Sustainable Development Goals that have been very widely accepted in Europe just fell flat in the United States. We had, let's say, transition in our leadership. Around the exact same time, the Sustainable Development Goals came out in 2015, 2016, and we had no path forward nationally to figure this out. So we had to build our own. So this is the equation that we use to help more library people find it accessible and find their path through to work on things where the most emphasis is needed. So as we think of where the most emphasis is needed, we have to turn around climate change, right? We have to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to slow down global warming, if not turn it around as much as possible. But at the exact same time, we have to adapt in the face of it because there are going to be changes to our environments, to our supply chain, to our food access that are going to happen concurrently with the work to mitigate. But all of that work needs to be done with an eye towards justice. So hearing that your organization is also focusing on equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's part of this work. As we noted in the triple bottom line, it's not just the environment and money, it's people. And as we think about the impacts of climate change, we have to recognize it is not going to impact all equally. You are going to see the communities that have been traditionally marginalized over time for a variety of reasons will be hit the hardest by what is happening in climate change. So as we think about our power and our privilege as librarians in institutions of higher education in our communities, how do we find those equitable access points to help educate folks about what's happening and to sometimes help elevate the voices of those that are not heard as we find paths to solutions? So what you will hear me say probably far too often when I talk about sustainability is actually the most important thing. I can talk about mitigation strategies, and we're going to talk about adaptation strategies too, but honestly, the most important thing to be focused on is can you build empathy, understanding, and respect for neighbors, amongst neighbors? Because if they have empathy, respect, and understanding for one another, they will work together to find solutions that are equitable in the face of what is happening. So climate change mitigation, I just broke down the equation for you, brought you some examples from folks that are in our program. This is, again, decarbonization, and we have examples of this all over your country and our country. It's been done sometimes at the national level, at the local level, at your campus level, right? There's so many examples of this. This is a traditional path to deal with climate change, just thinking about this. So the very first library certified through our program, I was a public library in Westchester County in New York. You can see them here, the Hendrick Hudson Free Library, looking to have a zero energy building. So they've got solar panels on their building. They've got battery packs in the building so they can be completely open even when the grid goes down. Recognizing that libraries are so integral to continuity of service needs during problems that happen, whether the power grid goes down or an area of the community has flooded, libraries are a place of first restoration, where people are coming to connect to the internet, to put their lives back together in the face of what's ever happened in these very acute disasters. And so if libraries certainly are leaders on these topics, are we building resilient facilities that allow folks to access our services in the face of what is happening? But the other really key thing they're doing is educating people about the choices that they're making. Over 25 years in this profession has taught me that librarians are chronically humble. We are often not talking about the good choices we make or why we make them. And so I do encourage you to crow a bit about the good choices that you make and why you make them. When you look at your library's website, I'm sure you're very good at saying what you do, but how good are you at saying why you do it? Because the why is what more people will connect with, even if they don't use your services. And so for libraries who are really constantly having to fight for resources and position in the institutions that we work in, we have to, again, connect more with people's values. So the educational component, this is a big flat screen monitor right in the children's room of the library that teaches people about the good choices the library has made and how the building actually works. This is the San Diego County Library. You can see they are actually building a whole bunch of new libraries, all of which will be zero net energy buildings. So they will produce all of the energy they need right on site, which is much easier to do in California than it is in New York, I'll just say. A lot more sunshine out there. But you can see they're also zero net water buildings. So they are producing gray water systems. So to reuse the precious water that comes, usually California is in a drought situation. Now they have a little too much water because of the atmospheric rivers that hit them in the first quarter of this year. But they're more adaptable now. Those buildings acknowledge there's going to be wild swings in the weather and how those buildings will be resilient in the face of that. They've also completely converted their fleet of bookmobiles and staff vehicles to electric vehicles, and now all branches of that library system have electric vehicle charging stations. So our goal, at least in our project, is to be able to say that you can go charge your car at any library in the country. I think that's a great place for people to go charge their cars and hang out at the library while they're at it. Also embedding this into our plans, you heard your own association has been doing this, so we're seeing more and more libraries begin to develop sustainability plans, climate action plans, call it what you will, but actually putting on paper, this is our goal, this is what we're working towards, and making sure it's very clear and we all understand that. This is the Concord Library in Massachusetts, the Rice University Library in Texas, getting very, very serious of talking about why we do this, and in Rice University's example, how it aligns with wider campus goals. This has allowed the library to become a broader part of conversations on campus about sustainability, and it has also resulted in more money flowing to the library to help with these initiatives they're doing, because now more of the campus, I think administration understands the power of the library, the visibility of the library, the trust equity the library has on campus. This is one of my favorite stories. This is from the Lindenhurst Library in Suffolk County in New York. And when we started our project back in 2014 or 15, we were asked, how would you know if you're successful? And we talked about the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. And my colleague, Matthew Bollerman, he said, when other people start calling libraries sustainability leaders. And this was last year on Earth Day, where the county executive held a press conference in the parking lot of the library to announce, I think it was a $5 million investment in electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And he literally said at the press conference, we're having this press conference here today because this library has been an early adopter and a leader in climate action in our community. So not only was the library being invested in, it was being seen as a go-to place for help with the electrification of the fleet of not only the county, but also for just everyday people who have electric vehicles and need to charge them. So a great moment where we can see the investment this library made to position themselves as that leader in sustainability. And many people in that community probably hadn't thought about that library in an awfully long time. So it was an ability to raise the profile of the library and explain that relevance and responsiveness in the face of a major trend, right, of switching over to electric vehicles. So adaptation is that idea of building resilience in the face of what's happening with climate change. So as we think about whatever your particular region's challenges are that are being supercharged by climate change, how do we make our communities more resilient in the face of that? And what role do libraries play? We've traditionally played a role where we think about our own institution, right? We think about disaster preparedness work. How do we retain our collections? If we have any unique items, to make sure they're salvaged first if there's a flood or other type of devastating weather event. But concurrent to that has to be the thought of how do we contribute to community resilience in the face of this. So understanding the number one hazard for your region, maybe the top two hazards for your region, and have you designed that as an institution, as well as how you will be a community partner in those moments when our entire community is impacted by these problems. We see often that communities come together in the aftermaths of disasters, and they're so friendly to each other and so helpful after disasters. But wouldn't it be great if we were like that all the time? So how can we affect change and model that in libraries? So I see here, I was doing a little research. Obviously, one of your biggest concerns here in this country are the rising sea levels, changes in the coastal lines that you see. Will you see more people moving inland? Will you see more devastating floods that ruin infrastructure? What will that look like for the folks that live in these areas of your country? And how will you start to think about not only the preservation of your own institution and your own collections and honestly your own staff members, but what will it look like as folks maybe migrate to different places of the country? What will it look like when folks from other countries start to migrate here because they're looking for a safer, more stable place to live over time? These are things that we have to acknowledge we operate within the context of, and they do impact our disaster preparedness. Disaster preparedness can take many different forms. This is just a brief example from one of our friends on the board of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, doing work to help our communities connect more with first responders, to show appreciation for first responders, not just in the aftermath of disasters, but all the time. In the US, we rely greatly on volunteer firefighters and EMTs, and we have a number of growing events at our libraries to thank them ahead of time, to show our appreciation all the time. And then also investing in that resilient infrastructure for libraries so they can be open when people need us most. I say a newer thing that they're investing in is preparedness work for library workers. We talk all the time about the buildings being ready, but are our staff ready? Do we have a plan at home? Do we understand what that looks like so we can take care of ourselves and our families and be in a place where we could actually come into the library to serve people? Climate resilience hubs are a growing trend in the US, and perhaps you have something similar here. But the idea is libraries helping more people be ready in the face of what's going to impact their particular region. And very simply providing information, displays, programs related to the particular hazards of your area. The Queens Public Library is the busiest library in the US. They've embraced the idea of being both a heating and cooling center. One of the more devastating parts of climate change will be rising numbers of days of heat waves. And so as we look at parts of our world that are not as air conditioned as others, we will find people suffering in longer, extended, and more frequent heat waves, and also looking for places just for respite, to get cool, to just physically cool down. And so as we think about the infrastructure needs of our communities and we build buildings for the future, we have to think more about these resilient features that need to be built in. Food security will be another big issue. I know this is so much fun, right? We're talking about such exciting things here, but food security is also actually a very critical issue as we think about interrupted supply chains, and we got a front row seat of that during COVID as we saw our supply chains interrupted, and some areas of our world are more vulnerable to this than others. In my world in New York State, we have massive areas of food deserts where there's not affordable fruit and vegetables for people that live in very modern civilized areas. So we're seeing more and more libraries devote any property they have to community farming. So this is a library where you can actually use your library card and borrow a plot of land and grow your own food. They have half of their land for patrons and half for community-supported agriculture. So folks come to learn how to grow food, and they grow that for the pantries and the shelters in the area. Eco-literacy, we have more and more examples of libraries really doubling down on eco-literacy, thinking that if more people understand how the natural world works, the more respect they will have for it. Some of my libraries do story times out in the field, we say, and I went to visit one and get a photo for it, and this young man, he was about 5 years old, was at an apple orchard, and I overheard him say to his mom, "I thought the store made the apples." He didn't understand how the natural world works. And I think as we get further and further away, we have the nature deficit disorder in our world where people don't get how it all works. So when they don't protect the right things over time, they become deprioritized, and that's why we're experiencing what we are, is because people have not taken care of the natural world. So I'll just say this one more quick example, and then we'll move on to justice and our program end here. But the Repair Cafe movement, which is really picking up the pace, I think is a fabulous example of a true triple bottom line definition program for sustainability. And if you're not familiar with this program, it really matches up local wisdom with folks who need to learn about how to fix things. And as we think of this simple act of neighbors helping neighbors learn how to do things, and we start to understand we have power to repair, maybe even small things. Perhaps that will scale up as we start to think of the larger problems our communities are facing, to repair things together that are on a much, much larger scale, whether it be policy or larger ecosystems. So it represents not only us helping ourselves, but also the respect for nature and the right to repair and to keep things out of the landfill. It teaches a lot of good lessons in one little program. So that other element that we mentioned of justice in the work that we're doing, we've infused this in a program we have in my own system, the Mid-Hudson Library System, through a program called the Library of Local, where we have specialized collections in the area of climate action and food security. We also lend seeds as well as gardening tools. But I think most exciting about the program is the idea of cataloging our neighbors. So not only when you're in the online catalog and maybe you're researching beekeeping, you find the book and the article and the DVD on that topic, but also your neighbor who happens to be an expert beekeeper. And so thinking about how we connect people with the experts in our local communities, which is what we'll take to be more resilient in the future, using the structures we've already created for millennia, right, as librarians, to connect people with the information they need to be successful. How do we have the more immediate access to the folks in our communities and on our campus that have the expertise that we need to survive and thrive in what's coming? So this was born out of the idea of how do we infuse justice into this work. And so part of the research we've been engaged with over the past year is seeing how well libraries in the US are prepared for not only disaster preparedness work at their own institutions, but positioned to help with community resilience. So just a little commercial here, we're publishing this work this summer. We're really excited about it, only because it revealed exactly what we thought, which is that there's a lot of work to do to help libraries be ready themselves, as well as to help their communities prepare. So climate justice work, right? This will go into some of the areas that you've already prioritized for yourself with equity and diversity and inclusion as well. But this is really at the heart of a lot of the work we do through the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, is helping our libraries think about not only the life experiences of library workers, but those that are impacted by climate change in different ways. Because we can see the effects of climate change are truly socially engineered in a lot of ways, not only in the causation of climate change, but how people are impacted by it. And if you haven't come across the author Eric Kleinenberg, I highly recommend his book, Palaces for the People. It's an ode to libraries, so it's a nice way to feel very empowered about the work we do. But he got his start as a social researcher in Chicago. And so this book he wrote on the impact of a heat wave on the social infrastructure of the city of Chicago, it revealed the true nature of what we are contending with, which is the need to have a tighter social fabric in order to be successful moving forward. His research indicated that the neighborhoods with the higher survivability rate in the face of this heat wave were those folks that knew each other better. They knew who lived by themselves, who didn't have air conditioning, who probably we should check on. And compared to those more wealthy neighborhoods where folks didn't know each other as well, didn't think to check on one another, and really just felt like, I've got this. I don't really need anybody. I can survive this on my own. So understanding that we do need to connect with others in order to be successful in the face of what's happening and what to come, again, goes to the heart of the actual work, which is to have respect, empathy, and understanding for one another. So we use the dashboard of donut economics. If you're not familiar with it, I think it's a fun way, I guess, to think about the systemic nature of everything we're talking about here today, because it is so overwhelming. The UK economist Kate Raworth put together this way to kind of put all of these things together and start to measure and see where the need is for focus moving forward. So her book is highly accessible. It's a very fun read. And I think you'll see, as I did, I got very excited as I was reading it, there's a whole section on the knowledge commons from a non-librarian. It was fantastic to see that connection that an economist was making to be able to access the knowledge of the world and leverage it to the benefit of many of those who are marginalized in our communities. So if you don't want to read the whole book, we wrote a chapter about it in our notebook, Libraries and Sustainability. I don't want you to buy the book. I want you to borrow it. Honestly, I'm not here to make money off of this, but we wrote a chapter on how to translate this for libraries. But it gives you kind of the dashboard look of where the most problematic areas are, whether it be the ecological ceiling, which is the crust of the donut, shall we say, or the social foundation of really focusing on the people and the impacts of the policies we've made over time have had on them. So as we think about the triple bottom line, this becomes the dashboard to measure the triple bottom line and how we're doing. And they've published the dashboards for most countries in the US. You can find one for Ireland on her website with the citation that's here in the slides. But you can see patterns that you might have guessed yourself of where people, which countries need to do work in which areas. But it's a place to start, right? As you start to identify where is the work that needs to be done in your corner of the world. Where will you find like-minded people? Where should you focus energy moving forward? It's a place to start if you're looking for an entry point. So again, the defense of the knowledge commons, like I said, I got very excited when I read that part, and I see you've got several programs on the conference program about this topic, so I don't have to spend a bunch of time on it, but it's integral to the survival of our world moving forward. And so when we think about how we talk about open access and the knowledge commons and defending the right to access for all people in the world, it's new language for us to embed in some of the ways we talk about the work that we've done for a very long time. So mindset shifts obviously don't happen overnight. Your minds are thinking right now about how this applies to your work, what you might do differently, how you'll find other people to help you do that work. And that's where we've tried to position the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. This is a group of 25 volunteers who figured out that we didn't quite know what to do, but we had to stop doing nothing. So we used this quote from Arthur Ashe, who's a famous athlete and humanitarian in the US. Really starting where you are, use what you have and do what you can. Figure out your position, where you are on what things are going on and what opportunities you have to influence things moving forward. Find others that think like you and let's move forward. All right, so we have to create that sense of urgency for people, and maybe some of the data we used here today can help you with that, but really getting focused and picking up the pace in the work. And this is what you'll hear over and over again from climate advocates. We're not moving fast enough on much of this work, particularly mitigation and adaptation. Justice as well, unfortunately. But if you have that vision, which you've got, you're here, you're at a conference talking about sustainability, right? And you've got to figure out how to just operationalize that and move it forward at a faster pace instead of kind of wandering around and thinking about it, right? We've got to get organized and go in the right direction and find other people that are going to go in that direction with us. So for our world, we want sustainable libraries that are actually operating sustainably. We're making good choices internally from a policy perspective, how we treat library workers, how we run our buildings. We're focused on social cohesion. We're helping to bring people together and have that respect and empathy and understanding for each other. And we're deliberately working on climate change mitigation and adaptation. All four of these ingredients add up to a more sustainable library to move forward with. So we have certain resources for you. You can download, or there's a mobile app version of the roadmap to sustainability. It's an individual resource for you personally to kind of gather your thinking and get organized on the topic. If your institution's already there, you can go for the certification program. Well, I can't say that. We just launched the US version of the academic program, but from what I'm hearing, libraries are pretty similar across the world, so maybe it works in Ireland too. But at the very least, you'll be able to learn from the other libraries going through the program. They publish the results of their work. Each time they're certified, you can access that through our website. Those are the 12 categories they do work in. Again, this is the program that helps them practice that mindset shift to make decisions using the triple bottom line across all the typical areas of work that we do in our profession. So these are the 4 libraries that piloted it for us. You can learn from Clarkson and Valencia already. Their presentations are available. Excellent work they did piloting it. Again, all focused on the triple bottom line. So my last little bit for you here to leave, if you take nothing else away from this, I hope we all agree we're trying to make the world suck less. This is a little story from one of my libraries. 2 of these young women in the middle walked into the Pauling Library, which is in one of the more rural areas of my system, and asked if they could borrow the meeting, they could book the meeting room space. And of course, the policy is you have to be at least 18 years old. And the children's librarian, instead of saying no, said, well, why? Why do you want to reserve the meeting room? And they said, we want to make the world suck less. And she said, cool, that's what we do here. So she went and asked the library director, could we make an exception for these two young women who would like to make the world suck less? He goes, cool, that's what we do here. We make the world suck less. So what they ended up doing is creating a whole program for the kids to come together and think about how to make the world suck less. They turned over the programming budget for teenagers at the library to the kids. And they decided on service projects that improved their little corner of the world. And so at the very least, what we are trying to do here is to be empowerment engines for our communities, to be catalysts for different thinking, and to convene people, to bring them together to solve problems in unique ways that work for your community or your campus. So I'll leave you with that. I understand we have time for questions. I'll just point out the website if you're interested in downloading the app or signing up for the newsletter. No charge for any of those things. It's great to learn from our peers, right? Here's my contact info. If you can't tell, I'm like really into this topic. So I like to hear from people and what you're working on. I took pictures of all the posters out there. Just really want to compliment everyone on the work you're doing. And thank you for your time and attention today. I really do appreciate it.